All right. Okay.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Craig Mercer. I'm the tennis director at Toronto Tennis City. We hope that everyone is doing really well and staying healthy and active during this time. And we're happy to bring you this discussion tonight on injury prevention in order to hopefully help everyone get off to a good start once we get back in action on the court. So we do have Dr. Bryon Weinberg here this evening, who I've known for over 2 decades. And he brings a wealth of experience as a former top junior Division I NCAA tennis player who went on to attain ATP doubles points on the Pro Future circuit. A graduate from the Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College, Dr. Weinberg is a chiropractor for the Toronto Argonauts of the CFL, where he was part of the 2017 Grey Cup Championship team. He was also the lead medical practitioner at the 2015 Pan Am Games and co-creator of the injury management program for Boxing Ontario. He's also worked with some of our ace tennis players in different capacities over the last number of years. So you're in really good hands. And without further ado, Dr. Bryon Weinberg.
All right. Thanks, Craig. Thanks for having me, guys. I'll try not to bore you too much. I want to make this as interactive as possible. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to turn on your mic and yell it out. You're not going to interrupt my train of thought. I don't have too many of them, so you don't have to worry about that. So if you do have any burning questions, please do that. I think there's probably a box somewhere you might be able to type it in as well, so we can keep an eye open for that. If not, just feel free to do that. So like Craig mentioned, we're going to talk about injury prevention. And just off the top, I don't typically like to say like injury prevention, because the only way to prevent tennis injuries is to not actually play tennis. So the goal is to reduce the risk of injuries. With any type of sport, there's going to be injuries. It's just the way it is. You see it from, the juniors, beginners, all the way up to, the adult members and seniors. And throughout that whole spectrum, we'll see injuries. But the goal is, from your coaches to your trainers, to your physios, chiros, whoever you're working with, is to minimize that risk of injury. And one of the big things to understand is why you guys typically get injured. And the best way to describe that is everybody has a certain capacity. So if you picture a cup of water, that cup of water is your capacity. And if you fill up that cup of water, that is considered the load, the amount of force, the amount of repetition that you're putting through your body. And after a while, you keep filling up that cup of water, and eventually you start to get that spillover. And that's where we start to see injuries occur. So you have a choice. The choice is either you stop filling up that, that glass of water, or you get yourself a bigger cup. And that's typically the way I like to go, is get a bit of a bigger cup. And what that means is you want to increase your capacity. You want to increase your ability to tolerate, the tennis stroke, running, what have you. Because, as much as we all love to play tennis, it's not the most natural sport out there. We didn't evolve over time to swing your arm hundreds of times in a day, or throw it up overhead hundreds of times over a day. So, our body only has a certain level that it could withstand before we start to see pain, or before we start to see injury occur. So like I said, the biggest thing is trying to build up that capacity level. And going back to that cup analogy, where I said, okay, we can stop filling up that cup, those are what I consider your days off. So as a tennis player and as a junior, and also for, you know, the a little bit older tennis players, you want to make sure that you're taking at least 1 to 2 days off a week. And, you know, that depends, you know, sometimes you might, you know, in 1 week, if you win a tennis tournament, end up playing 7 days, that's okay. You know, especially if you guys are with ACE, but typically you want to take that, that day off. And the other thing with regards to that injury management and reducing the risk of injuries, especially for you young players out there, is also getting enough sleep. Sleep is extremely important, and it's also associated with injuries. So you want to be getting, you know, minimum 7 hours a night. Ideally, you want 8 hours a night of sleep. So for especially the young kids out there who are listening right now, you know, get to bed at a good time, put your phones away, put your tablets away, you know, at least a half an hour, 45 minutes before you go to bed. That way it helps you fall asleep. That recovery time is very necessary because you break down your body while you're playing tennis, when you're lifting weights, when you go for a run, and it needs time to recover. It needs time to rebuild itself. And if you don't give it that recovering time, then you just keep breaking it down. And again, that's where we start to see a lot of overuse injuries. The other thing that I want to quickly mention, and I'm not a nutritionist by any means, but nutrition is extremely important, you know, not just for your general health, but again, from a recovery standpoint, but also a performance standpoint. So you want to be making sure that you're taking your vitamins. You want to be making sure that you're getting enough protein, and, you know, as well as you're drinking enough fluids. That becomes extremely important, as does, you know, I sound like a parent maybe because I am, but you want to eat your fruits and veggies. You want to eat your greens. Very, very important. Listen, if you guys want to be good tennis players and, you know, you want to function and you want good health, you got to be doing that sort of stuff. So, you know, if you look at like Djokovic's diet, he's a little bit more picky than most players out there. He's very, very, very picky on what he eats. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why he is as good as he is. So again, the sleep, the nutrition, extremely, extremely important. And if you guys do have any issues with that, talk to your coaches, talk to your trainers. They might be able to refer you to somebody to deal with that sort of stuff. And with the adult players as well, this is extremely important. Just, you know, just from an overall health standpoint, you know, heart function, you know, circulation, the immune system, especially now with this COVID going on, it becomes extremely, extremely more important. And again, just on a side note, I'd be not happy with myself if I didn't say this, especially with COVID going on, making sure you're getting enough vitamin D, making sure you're getting enough vitamin C, and also zinc. This is extremely important for your immune system. So, you know, for the parents that are listening, for yourself and for your kids, you really want to make sure that everybody's taking supplements for that stuff right now. Talk to a pharmacist to make sure if you're taking any medications that it doesn't have any adverse reactions with that. But this is extremely, extremely important, especially with, you know, the health crisis going on. And you don't hear many people talking about this right now. You know, you want to build up that immune system just in case you do actually get sick. So very, very important. And again, those would probably be my two big things. The vitamin D, next would be the vitamin C, and then also the zinc. So again, make sure you're doing that. Okay. Sometimes I go off on tangents, so I apologize, but this still has to do with tennis because it allows you to play tennis. So we can relate it back. So the one thing before we start getting into a little bit more specific tennis things is I want to talk a little bit about pain and injury. There is a bit of a misconception out there where people think that when they feel pain, they actually have tissue damage. And this can be a problem sometimes, even mentally, to recover from injuries. You know, you have some pain, you take some time off, you come back on the court, you might feel a little bit of pain. I just want to say, just because you have pain doesn't mean you necessarily have tissue damage, but sometimes you do. So it is very important to figure out whether or not you're just feeling a sensation of discomfort or whether you actually have some sort of tear, some sort of inflammation in wherever it is that you're experiencing pain. There was a study, I think it was, I want to say like 2016, where they took about 21 Major League Baseball pitchers who had no shoulder pain. Okay, they took them and they MRI'd every single one of them. And out of the 21 Major League Baseball pitchers who had no pain in their shoulders, I think it was about 11 of them had some sort of rotator cuff tear or some sort of labral tear, some sort of actual tear within their tissue. So again, what that shows you is just because you have degeneration, so for the older, tennis players that I'm talking to right now, just because you have degenerative changes or you have a tear, that doesn't mean you're going to have pain for the rest of your life, nor does it mean you might have pain, at this point in time as well. And again, sometimes you can, sometimes it does correlate with that, but not all the time. So it's very important, if you guys do get injured, to see, a qualified healthcare practitioner to determine whether or not that pain is related to the actual structural damage. Because there are times when I'm treating tennis players, well, I'll say, listen, you need to take some time off because we might actually be dealing with a structural issue and you could possibly make it worse. And there are other times where I'll tell my athletes that I'm working with, listen, you can push through this. And, it's a little bit of discomfort. It's sensitive. Worst case scenario, it gets a little bit more sensitive, but you're not going to create any more damage. So again, it becomes really important if you guys do get injured to see somebody who has the ability to, hopefully to the best of their ability, determine whether or not, you can push through a certain pain or discomfort. But again, if you do feel like you are in pain, please see somebody. So kind of put that out there as well. It's a little bit of a caveat there. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is, kind of why tennis players or why anybody really gets injured. And one of the big things with sport and tennis in particular, it is having the ability or the prerequisite ranges of motion in your body to actually play the game properly. So for instance, when you hit a tennis serve, your shoulder has to go into this, what we call external rotation. If you're lacking this range of motion, this prerequisite range of motion to hit a serve at say 120 miles an hour, then either number one, you're not going to be able to accomplish the task that you're setting out to do, or B, or number two, your body will find a way, it will compensate in order to get your arm into the adequate position. And typically what we see with a compensation like that is, okay, they can't get that external rotation. So what we'll see is they'll extend their back quite a bit in order to put their arm in a certain position. So again, with tennis, you need certain ranges in order to become the player that you want to be. Now, that being said, there are certain limitations. So for instance, if you didn't start playing tennis at a young age and you didn't start throwing a ball at a very young age, you're not going to have what they call a natural sport adaptation. So if you throw a ball at a young age over and over, or you hit a tennis serve over and over, your bone will actually start to grow in a certain way, or it'll start to morph in a certain manner that allows you to get into that externally rotated position. This is a natural position for you to be in. So if you never, if you just pick up tennis at 20 years old, don't expect yourself necessarily to be able to serve at the level, that you see on TV or, a college level potentially, without either a lot of work or, that's just your limitation and that's your body in general. So the big thing that I tell a lot of my players that I work with is, make sure that you have the ranges of motion and the prerequisites that tennis necessitate, that it actually needs in order to achieve, whatever it is, whatever goal that you have. And again, there are limitations on that. If you're 60 years old and, you don't have, I'll go back to the shoulder example, that external rotation. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to get that range of motion back as opposed to an 8-year-old or 10-year-old or, a prepubescent kid. So it'll be a little bit more difficult for you. So one of the ways to figure out, do I have these ranges of motion and, you know, that is needed for tennis, is get assessed. Like, get somebody who knows what they're doing and assess your body. Do a full assessment in order to see, do you have the ranges of motion and the prerequisite movements in order to, you know, in order to play to the best of your ability. So that's very, very important. And in that way, if you don't, then you can work with somebody in order to achieve those types of ranges, those types of movements that you want. So very, very important for tennis at any level. And again, if you don't have it because of certain bony changes in your body, that's okay. There's other ways to, you know, to go about it. But, you know, there are certain ranges that you need in order to hit, you know, 140-mile-an-hour serve like Craig does. So that becomes very, very important. The other thing that I want to say is, from an injury management or a standpoint, is on a daily basis, and I went through this, you know, if you didn't sit through my 4 hours of talks that I did for ACE over the summer or spring, every day's blending, I don't know when it was, you know, we talked about on a daily basis, taking your body and your joints through their full range of motion. So the only way your wrist, you know, and your spine can get the nutrition and the fluid into its joints is through moving those joints daily through its entire range of motion. So a good example is, and I heard this from somebody else, so, you know, I'm kind of stealing this information, but, you know, if you've done the splits, you know, since you were 4 years old, you do the splits every single day, 4 years old, you know, until you're 80 years old, guess what you're going to be able to do most likely when you're 80 years old? You'll be able to do the splits. So the idea is, at a young age, and you want to be moving your joints throughout their entire range in order to do it. And the best example of people not doing that is when you look at, you know, a little bit of the elderly population, and they're walking around, you know, in this kind of slumped, stooped position, and, you know, you tell them to look up at the birds or at the clouds, they can't seem to do it because, you know, for the past 60, not 60 years, for the past, like, you know, 10, 15, 20 years, they've been walking and staring at their shoelaces every day, and they're sitting at their computer every day. So they haven't done that motion throughout their entire life. And then over time, your body says, well, I don't need that range of motion. So forget it. We're going to lay down some bone, and, you know, we're not going to waste our time maintaining it. So it becomes extremely important to be moving your body every single day through its entire range of motion. And the other thing with that as well is, what it does from an injury management standpoint is it exposes your body to what you're going to be doing on the tennis court. So for instance, and I'm going to get into this in a little bit if I don't over talk here, you know, we see a lot of wrist injuries. I see a lot of wrist injuries with tennis players, and, you know, typically, you know, they catch the ball a little bit late. The wrist goes into an awkward position. You know, you add the speed, you add the load that goes through the joint, and boom, you get an injury. Now, one of the things to potentially reduce that risk is to expose your body to that range of motion beforehand. And that's what a warm-up should do. You want to expose your body to the ranges of motion and the positions that you're going to be doing while you're playing tennis or while you're working out or whatever it is that you're doing. So that way the tissue starts to create an adaptation or positive adaptation to withstand those types of motion. And as well, your brain goes, hey, I've been here before. My wrist has been in this position before. It's not an awkward position. I do not need to send a signal up to the brain that says, hey, this isn't good, this should hurt, and it creates pain in that area. So again, that's just another reason why you want to, you know, go through a very good and a very rigorous warm-up schedule before, you know, before you hit a ball, or even if you're not playing. It's just, you know, prepare the body, make sure it's ready to withstand what you're doing. But from a joint health standpoint, even if you're not playing, tennis, and I haven't played tennis for a while now because I got 2 young kids and they're kicking my butt. But I'll still do my daily routine where I make sure I'm moving. I'm trying to maintain the ranges of motion that I've had since I was a younger boy. So again, extremely, extremely important. Okay. Any questions so far? Anybody want to yell anything out? Or yes, I see a hand up. That is Matthew. Matthew, there you go. Unmute yourself. Perfect.
What about more?
What's up, buddy?
What about more? Okay, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Like growing injuries. Like I have Osgood-Schlatter's per se, and that like stuns almost my range of motion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like it's almost a huge bump on this. I'm not sure how to really show this.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. I had them when I was younger.
That like almost. And when I play tennis, I'm using a brace just to stop it moving as much so it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
So am I supposed to get like the full range of motion on that?
So yeah, so that's a really good point and a great question there. Thank you for asking that. So as you're going through growth spurts, and this is extremely important, and I'll remember this for the next talk to put this in. When you're going through a growth spurt, you will naturally lose range of motion because of the way the bones are growing in relationship to the other tissue, the muscles, the tendons, and as well as the receptors. So yes, you will lose range of motion. That is normal. That is not a bad thing. The other thing as well that players should know and parents should know, and as well as coaches, it's not abnormal to see a really good tennis player or a really fast tennis player start to you'll start to see their performance and their speed and everything start to decline potentially during a growth spurt. That is extremely normal. That is not a bad thing. That is not the kid's fault. So it's something that everybody should be aware of. So if you end up, working with a really good tennis player, or if you are a really good tennis player, and then all of a sudden you're like, my goodness, I'm slow, I'm clumsy. You're losing to players that you haven't lost to before. That's completely natural. Your nervous system will eventually catch up to what's going on with your body. And with regards to Matthew's question, range of motion, yes, you will lose some range of motion for sure. But that being said, leading up to that growth spurt, and you're going through it now, so sorry, but leading up to that growth spurt, you want to be having that daily routine so it exposes your body and you can maintain it. Because again, if I do this to my wrist every single day, and I'm not saying this is what I want to do, I'll be able to more times than not maintain that range as you go through it. And with regards to your Osgood-Schlatter's, yeah, it's a tough, I don't even call it an injury per se, but it's a tough sensitivity to have because, you're going to be putting a lot of stress and a lot of force through the body when you are walking. So the big thing for that is to try to get some compliance, so some range back in it. And that doesn't necessarily mean you doing tons of stretching. That could potentially mean you doing some eccentric work. So eccentric work means if I move my arm and I want to create a muscle here, this is concentric. So meaning the muscle is shortening. The eccentric phase is the lengthening process of the muscle. So you want to load the tissue potentially. So for my bicep, if I was going to do that, I'd put a weight in my hand and I would work on slowly lengthening that muscle under load. So with Osgood-Schlatter's, your quadricep muscle, the muscle in the front of the thigh, you would potentially want to find an exercise that would lengthen that muscle under load and again to tolerance. So without me assessing you, I can't say if that's the right exercise for you right now, but whoever you're working with regards to those injuries should be able to give you some ideas of things to work with. But it's a great question, Matthew. And yeah, you got to take that into consideration for sure.
As a follow-up, I've been told that I need to use strength in the muscle, but almost every time I bend it, it hurts.
Yeah. So you might have to, and again, without assessing you. So the caveat is if any of my stuff hurts, please don't do it. And talk to whoever you're working with. You might want to start with isometric exercises, meaning the joint doesn't move, but you contract it anyways. So it still puts a load through it, and it might build up a tolerance to eventually be able to withstand that movement. And as well as an eccentric contraction, at least in the research world, and I've seen it with patients, it actually has an analgesic effect. So it actually helps with pain. So contracting a muscle without causing any movement. So it's just you, if I was doing a bicep isometric, it would be a contraction, just hold. So you might want to find an exercise for that, but something to consider. Okay, great questions. All right, so we got 2 more minutes. I like those questions though, that's good. So I'm gonna fly through this real quickly, hit a couple points that we can go through. So a couple big, typical injuries that I see. Number one are the knees. We see a lot of knee injuries. A lot of them are like diffuse, pain kind of in this area. So not an ACL tear, not a meniscus tear. And I tell all my patients, whenever you typically have a knee issue, it's typically not the knee, it's typically the ankle or the hip. The knee moves, it does just bend like this. It also has a little bit of rotation to it. But if the knee's not functioning properly, or if the hip doesn't have the adequate range of motion, the knee will take the brunt of the force. And with that as well, I always say hips are king. The hips king or the hips queen. If your hips do not function the way they need to, meaning they don't have enough adequate internal and external rotation. So for instance, I hit a serve, I land on my left leg, my body needs to rotate in order to, slow down my body for movement. It will find that process somewhere else. And typically it's either in the knee or it's in the low back. And a lot of the knee injuries we see or the low back injuries I see as well, it's typically not the low back's fault. It's, typically the hip and maybe even this part of the spine here. Because with tennis is a rotation-based sport. And the problem is, if you're lacking rotation here in your thoracic spine, so from the bottom of the neck to about the bottom of the rib cage, which is responsible for rotation, or if you're lacking the rotation in the hips, so you set up for a forehand or a backhand, you got to have, rotation on one side, rotation on the other side, going the opposite way. If you're lacking that type of rotation, your brain's very smart, and it's going to find a way to get you into that position. And typically it's going to find it either through that low back, or it's going to find it through those knees there. So we start to see a lot of those issues. So from an injury management standpoint, make sure you guys are doing enough rotation-based work through that thoracic spine, but also through those hips as well, because that's what tennis is all about. It's all about that rotation, it's, running forwards, running backwards, great, but it's being able to load up, coil, and then being able to kind of uncoil into that spot. So if you lack that hip internal, external rotation, you're putting yourself in a disadvantageous position there. So, yeah, what time is it? I don't want to go, people are going to bed to make sure they get their 7-8 hours of sleep tonight, right? Right, everybody? So I will kind of end off, and I know I went on tangents and I apologize, but hopefully I hit enough points there. Even if you guys hopefully take away 1 or 2 little tidbits there, I hope it'll help you. If you do have any questions, feel free. Craig can, maybe it's in the email, feel free to email me. Like I said, this summer, I'm here to help tennis players. I want to help the tennis community. My goal is, to help as many tennis players as I can accomplish the goals that they want and maintain a healthy lifestyle, no matter what the age is. So send me an email. If I don't get back to you right away, it's just because I haven't checked it. It's not because I don't like you, and I'll do my best to help you out any way I can. So that being said, thank you very much, to Craig and Mike and Lawrence for putting this on, and Ace I really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for coming out. So hopefully you got something out of this, and yeah, appreciate your time, and hopefully everybody stays safe through this crazy period.
Well, thank you very, very much, Bryon. I know for me, I took a lot away from that. So definitely I'm going to be working on my range of motion, that's for sure. And yes, please, actually, if you wouldn't mind, maybe you can share the best way to contact you if you want to do that right now, just so people can jot that down.
Yeah, so I'll give you my work email address. So I work at High Point Wellness Center. It's in Mississauga, Etobicoke. So it's like by the airport, basically. It's not that far from Toronto. I live in Toronto. It takes me like 20 minutes, especially now with the no traffic, to get there. My email address is B, so my letter Bryon, B, and then Weinberg. So you can actually hover over my name on the screen there. That's WEINBERG at highpointclinic.com. Or my personal email address is just my name, bryonweinberg@gmail.com. So you guys can email me at either one of those. I probably check my bryonweinberg@gmail.com more than my work one. So feel free to do that. As well, just on a quick note, I run a teaching seminar. It's called Athletic Movement Assessment. So we teach healthcare providers, strength coaches from all over the world how to assess athletes. I also assess them in my own clinic as well. On Instagram and on Facebook, but mostly Instagram, on Athletic Movement Assessment, if you follow us, I post certain exercises. Me and my business partner will post certain exercises and also some research papers. So if you find that stuff interesting, every once in a while, we'll post some things and you can scroll through it to give yourself some ideas of maybe different exercises, or, you know, you can learn a couple things or two as well. So just another resource that you guys can look at. It's called Athletic Movement Assessment. So check it out if you want some more resources there. And otherwise, I don't know, that's all I got.
That's great. Thank you so much. And again, everyone, stay healthy and stay active, and hopefully we'll all listen to some of Dr. Bryon Weinberg's advice on nutrition and sleep and everything else. So be well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Take care.